I
So he's gonna speak around here.
like
How and your second job? I like it. Okay.
there are meetings all over Newark.
Yeah, they own like half of downtown. no joke. They have like 5 buildings.
Yeah, I'd already sort of planned like a stump speech about how much I love Newark. I mean, like I like it. Like it's near my home, so it's like
Okay.
love the
That's good.
Iron
That's
Man.
convincing, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah.
I want
I
to.
signed up for like last
Is it?
It's all common.
Did you sign up for it?
That'd be a bus though.
Nah, bro.
No, I'm not going, but I really want to. Well, they're like
We're right above.
There's like in the city, low-key spot in the, you know, it's in
I'll like introduce you once more people come in. I'll like introduce you once more people come in. But yeah, there's live
Okay,
stream.
so this is
There's the live stream.
I'll try my best to.
Yeah, the purpose I usually use it for is like a lot of people ask questions in the live stream because so. I mean, sometimes they don't, but it's also like I guess if someone wants to see it, you know. Yeah. Hey.
You know, they beat us. One man, they got a pizza.
I was at pizza.
You also have pizza too?
We have pizza, but no toppings, bro.
I know. I think I did one.
Yo, next year we're gonna. This is like OP, but I'm not sure if 50 Pizza is a representative.
My
But
God,
I'm-
so
I'm gonna try 50 Pizza next year.
They are.
amazing.
Like
They are?
Yeah.
Yeah, because your lunch is a monopoly.
Is that your Instagram?
It's not okay.
Hey,
We need competition.
Suarez.
I think that's
It's
it's like
like-
that's my
Yeah.
Instagram. That's my GitHub. That's my
It's like just your
Snapchat.
little, like, name.
I figured I was like, I'll just put it out.
I got you.
Yeah.
I hope no one ever follows me on Twitter because I
Oh,
Like,
okay.
ever since Donald Trump was elected, I gave up. Like, never.
Sound jokes.
Yeah,
No, that's me.
I feel like they just like as long
Go
as they
around.
know their e-board, they don't
Yeah.
involved in politics, but it's good to like go to events.
What's your TK?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was always like something else. It's like it's always like
Imagine
I
if
did the
people
forecast.
got mad and they just like gave Are You Mad like their pizza plus hours.
Yo, I went to go like snatch some, there was none left.
Oh.
And our pizza's still not here.
They're playing favorites. They're playing favorites.
Aren't you supposed to go pick it up?
Nah, delivery.
No, it's a delivery.
See, that's
I
what
just I put
they
it
like us
on one.
for.
I
Was
think
on
this was
Facebook.
return. It's almost like cultural club, so I can get more better options.
Ah.
Every possible culture.
I approve of this idea.
I approve of this message.
No, like heck yeah, like we're promoting the diversity.
Wherever
Really
you
diverse foods as well.
exactly.
How long are we waiting until like 9:09?
9:10, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I know 5 right now.
9:10.
we have a few people. There's a picture meeting. Like they question like, what?
Yeah.
I'm really wondering about like whatever you want to do.
I guess like I don't want to get stressed.
So like you're more than welcome.
I think 9.
Saving.
I mean, I do.
Yeah, what's good?
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah. You know, like,
We're gonna have to start at like 9. Yeah, just like 5 people.
I did not expect this many people. So.
Oh, seriously? When Facebook was in its like infant stages, our first speaker series was with Doug Rudolph. And I remember I think like 4 or 5 people came, some of which were like actually really funny too. So it was like,
I always say,
Because like for me, it's been like a few years out of college now. It's like,
Yeah.
I remember coming back. I took the train to New Brunswick, and then I was like, I actually was like, wait, do I take the A or the H? I couldn't remember. The H was 15 minutes away, so I just took the A.
yeah.
But then I also was like, is there like a weekday? I guess that you just forget that like people are in class. And once I saw people like leaving, I was like, oh shit, there's like people here still.
Really?
Like, I mean, it's like six people. I posted it on my Snapchat. So 6 people were like H for home and A, and I was like, I never dormed on Bush. I was on college Ave all 4 years. So. I think I used for me it was like H is the student center. A is voting. But like I would never go beyond. I think everyone beyond the center. Like, once you get to like Richardson Apartments, I'm completely lost. Like, I have no idea where I go.
That's like
Did you go for it?
I swung by my old door, I like snapped a picture of it. I was like, oh, it's so sad. For the first 2 years ago, I was at Brent Hall on College Ave, so I went to the quad. I was like, oh, it still looks the same. So many things have changed. Like, I've seen the yard. The yard I've seen, because that was like under construction when I was a kid. The new seminary I've seen, the new honors college I've seen, Hillel looks amazing. I'm like, holy shit. They have Hillel on College Ave. They have the wooden terrace outside. It looks amazing. They finally got rid of Aubon Pond at the Rutgers Student Center and replaced it with a Panera, which is like, I hated that place. So I'm like so glad.
Have you seen the living apartments? Or were those already there?
Those are already there, unless there's a new one.
No, there's a.
Okay, the living apartments were brand new when I was a freshman, so I'm not that.
Okay,
I'm not that.
it's like
But the yard to me is like super nice. And I'm very jealous of the new honors college on College Ave.
That's so nice.
We snuck in. We followed some people in and just walked around. We clearly looked like we didn't belong. That place is so nice.
It's so nice.
And like I used
You
to.
know, professors like live with them. Like there's live-in deans, and then they get like special. They get free coffee in the morning. I think that's the most ridiculous thing. It's like if you go downstairs, there's free coffee. And like you can chat with your professors or like your deans over coffee.
That's pretty cool. There's also a few new engineering buildings on Bush.
Oh yeah.
The ones that are near the student center for engineering are brand new. Weeks, yeah. I've never seen that one before.
Weeks
So
is
that one's
beautiful.
very nice. They're very fancy. Okay, I'll wait for like 1 or 2 more minutes and then we'll get started.
Have you seen the new Isles?
Which office?
The TV show.
You sound lucky.
I mean I know the show, but like I don't really watch that much TV anymore.
No, like OSS. Like, did you see the new?
Oh shit! Oh, yeah. So they told me, Mickey told me that OSS moved, but I have yet to see it. He was like, yeah, we're in some weird building. I was like,
Okay, so I think we're gonna get started now because it's 9:10. I wanted to give people time with the buses, with the Are You Mad event, everything to come on in. Also, there was supposed to be pizza here and it hasn't come, which is a little weird because I ordered it. They sent a confirmation, but maybe they're late. We'll see what happens. But anyway, this is Kyle Suarez. I knew him when he was working full time on MongoDB and it seemed super cool. And then I remember this. I was sitting on my laptop on Facebook and I see Kyle Suarez is now working at 2 Sigma. And I was like, wait, what? That's crazy. He was like just at MongoDB. So I thought that was interesting. So now he's gonna talk about it a little bit.
hey guys, so thank you very much for having me. Please bear with me. This is the first time I've given this talk, so like I'm still working it out. So please bear with me. So this talk, I'm calling it sophomore season. It's how to land your second job. And I know for a lot of you, like this just sounds like a really, really weird topic for me to be giving when I'm like presenting to college students, right? It's like for most of you, you don't even have your first job, and you're like, what the hell? Why are you even talking about this? This seems like very not appropriate. But I did some research before I gave this presentation, and actually I looked at 2 different sources. More than half of all college graduates who get a job right after college, more than half of them quit before they've even finished a year at their first job. So I have 2 sources that I cited here. The first one is a company that did their own research. They came up with a 55% number. The other source draws data from the U.S. Department of Labor Statistics. That one has an even higher percentage rating. Even though the spread is wide, they're both very, very high numbers. And so I think the point that I want to make is like a lot of people, like focus on like, how do I get that job? If I can just get that first job, everything will be so easy. But I think for a lot of you, you might find yourself looking for a second job much sooner than you expected. And I wanted to give this talk because a lot of the stuff that's out there focus only on, this is how you get your first job. This is how you break into computer science. Like they focus on like, once you get in, you've made it. And I just want to say that it's pretty hard. Like I feel like they say that the phrase like, like sophomore slump, right? Like your freshman year, you're great. You come into the sophomore and suddenly you have no energy. Like it's hard to do anything. I think they say it for a reason. There's a sophomore slump when you're in college, and I think there's definitely a sophomore slump for me when I decided to look for my second job. And so I guess the alternative title to this presentation is how to prepare for job N, for any N in the natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, and so on. Like I'm certain that like all of you are very smart and you'll get your first job. But when you eventually decide like, hey, I need to look for another job, these are the sorts of things I think you need to think about. So before I like dive super deeply in, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about myself. So like Tina said, my name's Kyle. I graduated from Rutgers in 2015. I have a major in computer science and math. So during my junior year here, I did an internship at MongoDB. Once I graduated in 2015, I immediately joined full-time at MongoDB as a software engineer on the database query team. So it's a lot of low-level systems work, working on databases and making databases run, basically. After 3 years, I decided I wanted to look for something new. So just last year, I decided to do another job hunt. This is me looking for my job. And I landed at 2 Sigma. So at 2 Sigma, I work on a team called High Frequency Market Data. It's the team at 2 Sigma so 2 Sigma, if you don't know what it is, it's a hedge fund, very large hedge fund in Manhattan. The High Frequency Market Data team is responsible for the platform that basically connects the hedge fund to all the different stock exchanges around the world. The New York Stock Exchange, the Tokyo Stock Exchange, all the stock exchanges in Hong Kong. Like my team basically connects us to them, and it has to go as fast as possible. We basically measure our code in nanoseconds, billions of a second, like unbelievably fast. And so I want to sort of give you a little bit of a glimpse of what I had to go through when I was looking for my new job last year. I've only been at 2 Sigma for 6 months now. Everything is still new to me. And there's like a lot of stuff still fresh in my head. And I had a lot of questions when I started the job hunt. And for you guys, I hope that like by the end of this presentation, I can answer some questions like, okay, how do I prepare, for looking for a job after I've already had my first? What should I expect? What's so different about it? Is there anything that I should do right now, even if I'm not currently looking for a job, if I'm still in college, if I'm still at my first job, and like I'm not even like thinking about it? What should I be doing every day to prepare myself for that time in the future when I do need to change? And I guess the most important question of all is, like I already got a job once. Like how much more different could it be really to get a second job? And I think it's a really valid question. No matter which job you're interviewing for, there's certain things that are always going to be the same. Like there's certain fundamentals that are never going to change. Like, you'll always have to be able to write code and write code well. It doesn't matter where you go or how old you are. Right? You always have to master your basic programming concepts. You always have to master like your data structures. Like this stuff doesn't change. And so, like what's so different? It's going to differ from person to person. For me, I like to think of it this way. The difference between interviewing as a new grad for the first job and an experienced hire for the second plus is sort of like the difference between being in college and being in industry. And so let me explain. When you're in college, right, you might be given like this textbook full of algorithms, and it's like, okay, memorize these algorithms. I'm going to give you a test on this in 3 weeks. Like, that's it. So you basically just memorize it, you spit facts out from there. In the real world, you have to be able to take those algorithms and be like, okay, can you take that algorithm and make it work in our code? By the way, there's like 700,000, 800,000 lines of code. Can you just fit it in here somewhere and make it work? And by the way, you know, like all of your new code, it has to work with all our integration tests. You have to write new integration tests. Everything has to work and not break. Oh, and like it has to work on your computer. It has to work in AWS. It has to work in GCP cloud platform. By the way, there's like this 12-year-old code. Nobody's ever touched it before. You can't break it at all. Like there's a whole bunch of different things that you're going to have to face when you're working in a real job that I feel like you don't really get the experience in when you're in college, right? In college, you tend to focus on things like algorithms and sort of a black box. Once you start working in the industry, there's like a lot of, I guess, stuff that you sort of feel like, hey, why do I have to deal with all this cruft? I never signed up for this. But that part that I didn't sign up for this part tends to be a lot bigger than most people really think it is. And so becoming like a really good engineer in the industry is sort of like dealing with all this extra stuff that is sort of like unexpected. To put it another way, it sort of reminds me of those like systems of like equations that you see in like linear optimization. It's like, okay, maximize this objective function subject to these constraints. So I work at hedge funds, so the objective function might be something like, you have to maximize profit, which is a function of these things, subject to some trading restrictions based on how much money I'm allowed to go long and I'm allowed to go short. Oh, and like, oh, there's like a certain number of trades per second I can do. And if I exceed this number of trades per second, the New York Stock Exchange is going to cut me off and call me and say like, hey, you're trading too much. You have to slow down. And like, oh, by the way, the GCC compiler is like 9 years old and there's a bunch of stuff that you wish you could write, but it's not going to work. And oh, by the way, if you write your code in this particular way, it like causes this bug. So like nobody's ever documented it, but you just have to know. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff like this that you have to deal with. And it's not easy. And so once you have a few years of experience like this, people are going to expect that you've survived this and that you've learned from this. So once you start interviewing for your second job and beyond, the bar is raised. The bar is definitely raised. These employers are going to basically expect everything they've expected from a college graduate and even more. Specifically, they're going to be like, you need to bring me skills that have proven to me that you spent your time at that job wisely, right? They're not just going to accept a level that would be acceptable from, say, a recent college graduate. They're going to expect you to do better than that. So as an example, I just want to give you a snippet of the resume that I submitted during my job hunt. It's not the best resume, but I got a job out of it, so I guess it's decent enough. So this is the beginning part of like the experience section on my resume. And when I say present, at the time it was around like July 2018. You don't even have to read this like deeply because any recruiter who isn't even technical is going to see this and only going to focus on a few distinct parts. And they're going to draw some really important conclusions just from some of the most basic stuff here, ignoring the jargon. The most important thing is like, okay, August 2015 to present, 3 whole years of experience, which means anything that I've written here, they're going to think that you have had 3 whole years to master that. Oh, C++, all right, 3 years of C++, you better be a master of C++ by the end of it. 3 years of like MongoDB and databases, okay. I should be able to like grab my coworker who is a whiz at databases, and he's just gonna ask you all the hardest questions that he has in his head about databases. Whether or not that's fair, I think that's something that you have to keep in mind that like this is what people are going to quiz you on, right? This is what people are going to expect of you. They're going to see you as a person with 3 years of experience, and therefore 3 whole years. Like, think of it. Think about it. That's like going from a freshman to a junior in like one single subject. So they're going to expect that you're really, really good at it. And so the level that they expect from you on this interview is going to be pretty high. Another thing that I think is important is they're going to focus on a lot of specifics. I have interviewed, when I was at MongoDB, I've interviewed both new grads and experienced hires. And I think one of the big differences in the questions that we ask is, for new grads who have no experience, we ask pretty generic questions. We'll just be like, what classes did you take? Do you know about this data structure? Tell me about this data structure. It's pretty generic. It's kind of like, nothing is unique to you, right? I'm just going to ask you the same cookie cutter set of questions. When I see a resume of someone who comes from, like a different company, I'm going to ask them specifics about what they've done at that company to see like how that company grew because of that. So I want to give you this is a real life example of one of the phone screen questions I got from one of the hedge funds I was interviewing at. So if he was giving me like a basic question, he might have asked something like this. He might have said, are you familiar with the formula for standard deviation? How might you calculate the standard deviation of a bunch of data points where not all of the data points are in the same machine? They're scattered amongst different machines. How would you calculate the standard deviation? Now, if he had asked this question, I would have been really happy. I remember this very distinctly. I was at home in my boxers. I was like taking this call like by the window. And instead of asking this, he looked at my resume and said this. Oh, I see that you've been working on the database query team for 3 years now. How does MongoDB calculate the standard deviation in a sharded cluster? And then the most important thing he added to this question is why. That is the biggest change from this question to this question, right? It's like, it doesn't matter if you have memorized the formula for standard deviation off off the top of your head. No one cares. The real question is, there's multiple formulas for how to calculate it. Why did you pick that? Why is that in the code? Could you have picked something else? What were the trade-offs between that like fueled your decision to choose this algorithm and this method? And I'm not even kidding. He then said, I have the code. So MongoDB is an open source database. I have the code for MongoDB's sharded standard deviation up in front of me. Could you talk to me about it? I was panicking. I was like, oh God, oh my God. So I pulled out my laptop. I brought the code up. And I just wanted to let you know, just because I work on the query team, I didn't write any of this code. I had nothing to do with this code. This code was written 5 years before I had even joined the company. And I was still expected to be I still don't think it would have been good for me to be yeah, I don't know anything about this code. Sorry, I'm just gonna give up. I was able to basically I looked at this. As you can see, there's Wikipedia links of we just stole the algorithm from Wikipedia. And I remember I clicked this link and was okay, there's all these different algorithms for calculating standard deviation. I remember speaking to the interviewer on the spot okay. So I see that this algorithm for computing standard deviation, there's multiple ones that can be done in parallel, but this one does a good job of reducing the floating point error. And I used the knowledge that I had of the rest of the query system to be okay, listen, I didn't write this code, but in my understanding, this is how the rest of the system works. And this is why I think this choice of algorithm is a good fit for the spot. I was sweating bullets when I was answering this question. I also know nothing about statistics, so I barely understand anything with standard deviation. But I did get passed on to the next round, so I guess I did a decent enough job at this question. But these are the sorts of differences between your new grad interview and the next interview. that you get when you so if you join a company, once you graduate, and you're like, okay, it's been a year, I'm kind of bored, I just want to move to a new job. Don't just think that the next set of interview questions are just going to be super easy. You really need to examine what you're doing and prepare yourself for the sorts of questions that they're going to ask you. And so how do I prepare? If this is the sort of daunting task that comes ahead of me for the rest of my life, how do I get ready? For me, I basically split it up into two sorts of things. To be successful, of course, you always have to prepare for the interview, and there's specific things that you should do for the interview in preparation for when you're going to start interviewing. But then the second part is the stuff that I think you should do every day, whether you currently have a job, you're still in school, you don't even have a job yet. These are the two sorts of things that I'm going to break them up to. So the first section is, what should I do when I'm practicing for interviews? When you practice for interviews, it's basically every other are you FizzBuzz talk that you've attended. None of the stuff that other people have said is that much different from what I'm saying. So all the fundamentals, all the basics of computer science, all the data structures, all the algorithms, all that still applies. So basically just hashtag include all of that and keep that in the back of your head. But I think there's a few other specific things that you should keep in mind. One thing that I did that I found very helpful is you really have to study your resume. For new grads who have no experience, most of your resumes just tend to be very generic, right? It's just okay, you went to school, right? You have no experience, whatever, everyone's the same, right? You're just tested on the same basic level. When industry interviewers interview people who do have experience, they're going to look much closer at their experience and they're going to scrutinize it much closer. And so you really, really have to be able to talk about anything you've listed on your resume. I have once interviewed someone and he put a particular, I worked on this project while I was at Microsoft. And we asked him, we were so tell us about this project. He actually he was yeah, this project, yeah, it was one of my first ones. I don't really remember what I did. That was a disaster, basically. You pretty much have failed the interview if you can't even talk about something you've put on your resume. And I think that's doubly true for someone who is already working somewhere and they're applying for somewhere else. So what I did, I had a section on my resume where I talked about the major projects I had done while I was working on the query team at MongoDB. So what I did was I took this and made a study guide for myself. I basically put okay, these are the 3 projects I said I put on my resume. These are the questions that people like to ask, the most cliche questions. I basically was ready for anything. Tell me about, a time you struggled with a team. It's I would love to tell you about this intern that I hated. I didn't hate her, but it was not a good experience. But believe, I was ready for everything, right? You know that you're going to be asked cliche questions. You might as well prepare for the cliche questions so you look like you're prepared. It never hurts to be ready for anything. I think that this is a suggestion either by cracking the coding interview or programming interviews exposed. So this is not new to me. This is definitely out there. But do it because it helped me. And I think it can help you. Another thing is you really, really need to research your target. And I think the 3 things that you should keep in mind are the industry, the company, and the role. All 3 factors, sort of shape what you should expect when you're interviewing. For me in particular, I interviewed at, I think, 4 different hedge funds when I was looking for a new job. The industry thing really helped. After I learned a few basic fintech algo problems, I actually was asked a few questions multiple times. And I actually was oh, wait, I know how to answer that because I actually just answered that at my last interview. So these sorts of things will come up and they definitely help. And when you research your target, I feel there's a lot of people when they're hey, do you have any questions for me? At the end of this interview, a lot of people are yeah, whatever, I don't really have questions. Take advantage of the questions. I think it's a super important chance for you to like understand a new company before you jump into it. So you really should ask them, like, even if you've done all the research and like you know everything about this company, I think there are still questions that you can ask to put them on the hot seat. Things like, why are you hired? If you're interviewing for a management position, I think this is a fantastic question to ask. What happened to the last person who filled this role? You're interviewing for a new manager for this team. What happened to the last manager? How long has this position been open? I think these things are very important questions that can give you some insight as to the kind of role you'd be going into, that they're never going to post that, right, on a job posting. But I think those are important things to know. And I was talking to some people in the room before I started the presentation. But when you are researching a job, always, always, always reconfirm some of the essentials. Like, what is expected of me? Tell me everything I'm expected to do. What programming languages will I be using? Are there extra obligations I have to fill? This is a true story. At 2 Sigma, I put on my resume that, oh, I have like all these years of C++ experience. No one ever told me that on day one when I started, our team doesn't write in C++. They write in a different language. And I was like, excuse me? Like, I actually was shocked. I was like, oh, there clearly was a failure of communication here, because I'm surprised at the kind of code I'm going to be working in. This thing, are there any extra obligations? If you are wondering why I have 2 laptops here, it's because I'm currently on call for 2 Sigma for the trading system. So if the trading breaks, so right now I think Tokyo, Australia, China, all of them are in active market trading hours right now. If anything breaks, this laptop will tell me if anything breaks, and this phone will ring because I'm going to have to stop this presentation and fix it. I also did not know that I had to go on call on night support when I started this company. So I'm like not even kidding. They're like definitely like basic things. Like, what programming language are we going to be writing in? That you'll be surprised people don't ask. I think it's better for you to just get all the dumb questions, quote unquote, like answered, than for you to show up on day one and be surprised. So just wanted to put that out there. So this is the sort of stuff that I think you should prepare when you're like, yes, I know I want to go for a new job. I know I need to prepare for the interview process. This is what I have to do. But ultimately, I think that this is just a small part of what you should be doing to really be successful. Like for me, I think the interview prep is important, but it's a small part. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that I think that you have to build on every day to really like help you get through this whole process. You know, like that 99% everything else is the stuff that you're doing every single day that you can just build off of and call upon like when you're put into a situation like this. So one thing that is important for anyone who has a job right now is to use your benefits. There's a lot of computer sciencey jobs that, you know, like they have in-house training. 2 Sigma has a lot of in-house training classes. Sometimes your job will pay for you to go back to school and like take some courses. Like these things, like always take advantage of them and always speak to your HR department to make sure you understand and are using your benefits to the fullest. And I'm sure a lot of you don't have a job yet. This is exactly the same if you're still a student. Instead of in-house training, it's like clubs, extracurricular activities, computer science department programs, courses and talks. Like take advantage of these things while you're still a student. Because while you're still a student, you still have time to do lots of things. Believe me, once you become like old and go into the industry, you'll find out that like, wow, like I barely have any free time sometimes. So like, even for me, like this is getting pretty late on a Wednesday. I have to go into work pretty late tomorrow. And instead of reaching out to your HR department, reach out to your deans and advisors for advice. You know, like, just look around. I think the computer science community at Rutgers is very strong. Take advantage of your peers. and get use them to the fullest to really maximize your time here. I think even more important than that is always make your work meaningful. So if you are working at a job, many times your manager will come to you and say hey, we're planning for the next quarter. What do you want to do? At most computer science jobs, you sort of have a choice of this is what I want to work on. This is what I want to do. You should seek out projects that are going to be meaningful to you. That's going to make you better both personally and professionally. And if you're still at school, the same thing works with extracurriculars. There's definitely a course you have no choice. You have to fulfill all these basic requirements. But for computer science, at least for me, I had a lot of free electives to choose from. I had time to take extra classes that weren't necessarily required. I think you should really think about the classes that you take. Some people just want to take the bare minimum, and that's fine. But for others, if you're interested in sort of pushing yourself, really think about the sorts of extracurriculars you can take, keeping in mind that if you had to decide on a criteria, think about either reinforcing areas that you're really strong in, wow, I love computer security. I want to get really, really good at it. Or maybe you're wow, I know nothing about computer security. Maybe I should take something and strengthen that weak area. So these are the sorts of things that I think you should think about when registration comes and WebReg is open. Today? Okay. So
15 minutes.
And I think lastly, this one, it seems sort of weird, but for me, this has been super, super helpful. Keep track of your accomplishments. Whether you're in school or at a job. I don't really like saying keep a diary because I hate journals and diaries. But at my last job, I actually kept a weekly record of all the meetings I had with my manager. So we used to have one-on-one meetings every week. And I recorded all the notes that I ever took for each one. This is an actual snippet of some of the notes I took while I was still at MongoDB and meeting with my manager. And because I kept basically 3 years worth of these notes, I was able to look back and see oh, I was working on this project for 3 months and suddenly I completed it. I moved on to the next project. That one took a little bit longer. I sort of struggled with so and so and so. Keeping a log like this can be really, really helpful just because you can look back and see what was I really good at? What did I blaze through super fast? What was really hard for me? Where did I struggle? What is expected of me from my manager? I think it's useful for, you're going to interview at a new job, you instantly have a list of the things that you've accomplished. So when you're I need to fill out my resume, what did I actually do while I was at this company? You can look back at these notes and say hey, here's actually a list in chronological order of the things I've accomplished. It can be used for asking for a promotion. You can show your boss, hi, you said this. You said you were very proud of me for completing this. Give me my promotion now. I mean it. I think this is the most important. Come promotion time at a job, most companies will do 6 month or yearly reviews, and they'll be, in the last 6 months, what have you accomplished that makes you worthy of a promotion? If you're not prepared for that, you can basically kiss that promotion goodbye, right? You should be putting the impetus on yourself to sort of keep track of what have I accomplished, where am I going? How do I orient myself so that I'm always working towards the next goal? And I actually used that when I was building my resume for the next series of job hunts. Ultimately, I think these sort of fundamental everyday things are the most important. I think it's the stuff that you do every day, that you do in your current role. These are the things that will prepare you for the next. It's not just oh, I need to open up cracking the coding interview. It's the stuff that you build on every day. That's what's going to help you sort of push yourself on to the next level. And honestly, if you do this, it just makes it much less stressful because a lot of the groundwork has already been done, right? You just have to brush up all of the old stuff, get ready for interviewing, and you're set. I think there's one thing that I sort of mentioned, but is also super important, more than just like books, more than prep, more than like skills and whatever. Always, 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 friends and family. I think you guys know this, especially if you're a senior and you're looking for jobs. Interviewing is super stressful. For me, I had a really tough time when I was interviewing. It's not only taxing to lie to my boss and be like, oh yeah, I'm like sick today, I can't like go in when I'm secretly interviewing at Google. It's also, like tiring. Like, I was just mentally and emotionally exhausted. And I really had to lean on my friends and my family for help. This is the same for job 1, it's the same for job 2. You don't know if like another recession will come and you suddenly lose your job. So like use the people around you to help you, because I think that's really, really important, and it's something that people don't tend to talk about a lot. So just to recap some of the stuff I've talked about. Each job hunt is different. Whether you're job hunting for your first or you're job hunting, you're expected to carry your past experience with you. I don't think you should like go to a job, work there for 5 years, and then start applying and be like, yeah, I don't think I really learned anything at like my 5 years at this job. Like you really have to keep track of the things that you've done and focus on the specifics and how you have been an asset to the company that you're leaving, as you like move on. Like you definitely have to prep for the interview. Always practice the fundamentals, do your research your resume, make sure you won't get surprised if anybody asks you questions about your resume. But also make your current role count, whether it's school or a current job. Like make your projects meaningful. Make the stuff that you work on meaningful, if you can. Some people are quitting because they have awful bosses. Like that I understand. But definitely try to take advantage of the current situation you're in as much as possible. And so thank you. Thank you very much for all of your time. This ended up shorter than I expected, but this is like the first time I've given this. So please, thank you for like your patience. I'll open it up now for questions. I'm happy to answer any questions about looking for a job or even just like MongoDB or 2 Sigma in general. So whatever you guys want.
I guess one of my questions is, well, I guess I have 2. So my first one is, what made you shift from MongoDB to mostly hedge funds? And then my second question is, out of all the hedge funds that you interviewed at, which one would you say was the most unexpected in terms of like what you were looking for when you like did the interview?
So the first question is, why did I shift from working at this open source database company to a closed source evil fintech hedge fund? So at MongoDB, I worked on the database query team. So this is basically the team that makes the engine run, right? This is basically the lifeblood of the database. So it's all C++, it's all low-level system code. It's like very, very, like there's 2 things that are really important. It has to be really, really fast, and it has to always be correct. Like it would be bad for the database to make a mistake. When I was looking for places, like I like talked to Google, I talked to Facebook, and so I was looking for a role that had something similar, like really, really technical, really low level, C++, fast, correct, performant. I remember I interviewed with someone at Palantir, and I told him, like, this is what I want in a job. And he laughed at me, and he was like, you are never going to find that in New York unless you go to a hedge fund. And if you think about it, a hedge fund is like very similar in some regards. It has to be very, very fast. A mistake would be very costly. It will cost me like millions of dollars if I mess up and suddenly the trading system goes wrong. And I also just found it hard to find similar roles. Like I'm not interested in being a web developer. I'm not interested in like security and stuff like that. So I think part of it is like I want to continue doing systems development work, and hedge funds was a way for me to continue that without leaving New York. And your second question was,
Oh yeah, so I guess out of all the companies that you interviewed at, which one would you say like went the most unexpectedly, or like which one do you would you say like you thought would like have something and then it was like totally different from what you expected?
I think a lot of them basically fit in line with my expectations. D.E. Shaw was probably the most interesting. I'm being live streamed, so I'm going to watch my words very carefully. In their own words, they contrasted themselves with 2 Sigma. The founders of 2 Sigma were actually employees at D.E. Shaw and decided to leave and form their own hedge fund. So when I interviewed at D.E. Shaw, it was so mathematical. Like, a lot of the interviews I had at other hedge funds were really focused on like, hey, make this code work as fast as possible. Tell me, how would you optimize this code? D.E. Shaw was nothing like that. Every interviewer at D.E. Shaw, everything was a math puzzle. Like, everything was just abstract. It was like, one of the interviews, he was like, I'm a web developer. So I was expecting him to ask me questions about like, let's talk about like, you know, like imagine I had N sticks on the table and I had to combine, it was like, there was like some cost function of like gluing sticks together. And it was like the last thing I had ever expected. And in their own words, they were like, 2 Sigma is like the Google of hedge funds. D.E. Shaw sort of is like, and this is their own words. He was like, we're like the physics department at a university. Like, it's a lot more mathematical and a lot more research focused. So definitely each hedge fund has their own reputation on the street. And D.E. Shaw's is like, they're very sharp mathematically, very smart people. Even if you're like a web developer, you better be able to like, I don't know, do all this crazy math and stuff.
Do you think you could have gotten a job at 2 Sigma without your math double major?
Yes. So I did mention that I am a double major in math and computer science. I have yet to ever use my mathematics degree. Part of it, I blame myself, to be fair. So when I was like filling out all of the math stuff, I was like, wow, I don't really like statistics. So I ignored all the statistics stuff. I ignored all the applied mathematics. I was like, I really like set theory. I really like complex analysis. So these are the things I took. Literally, all of the math questions that they asked at D.E. Shaw and 2 Sigma are statistics related. Applied math related, especially if you go into finance, it's like all statistics. So not a single company has asked me a like set theory or real analysis question. So unfortunately, all of that like knowledge has not been really put to use. So I sort of blame myself on that one. You can totally take a math major here, focus on sort of applied mathematics, and do fantastic. I did not, and so I did not use any of it. Like, no one's ever asked me like, calculate the surface integral around this. Like, I wish they did, but they didn't. So.
I have a question about T Sigma. You said they have the night duty. Do you have to stay up all night for that sometimes if you get it?
So luckily, like, so 2 Sigma has been around for what, 17 years now. So I think the system has gotten pretty good that I usually don't get beat. Typically, so we basically rank failures into 3 different levels. There's sort of like, there's a notify level, like, okay, this job failed, it's not too important, you don't have to care about it. There's a morning level, which is, okay, this failure is serious, but it can wait until the morning. So it's like, you have to, like, someone in the morning will wake up and fix it before the stock market opens at 9:30. But you don't have to fix it right away. And there is critical, which is the red ones. Those will wake up. Even those, it's like a judgment call. So as long as trading hasn't stopped, I can basically be like, listen, I tried my best, tried to fix it, it's not working, we'll look at it in the morning. I'll snooze it until the morning. The only time that it's really like everybody has to be awake, you can call your boss and your boss's boss until it's like that sort of level is when trading has stopped. So if trading has stopped, it's a complete like all hands on deck, everybody wake up.
Have you guys ever hit that point while you're there?
Not during my tenure. I think we purposefully are like if we're gonna deploy a change that's scary, we do it in US hours so that everyone's around. Like, no one's ever going to deploy a change that's potentially really like disastrous, and it's going to take into effect at like 2 a.m. in the morning. So, thankfully, no. Most of my night shifts have not been super bad. So.
Yeah, so for students who've had an internship, they're looking for like their next internship. So you said you've interviewed like new hires and stuff. Do you grill them on their previous internship, or you also just stick to like the basic CTCI and legal stuff?
That is, it sort of depends from person to person, but at least when I was at MongoDB, I was really, really involved with the interviewing committee and the committees for interviewing. We always asked specific questions about people's past internship experience. I think the same thing applies for internships as real jobs. It's like, okay, I understand most internships are only 3 months. It's not really a lot of time to make a big impact, but I think it's still important for me to be like, tell me about your project. Can you talk about your project? I'm not really interested in did it have impact, because I don't think most internship projects have impact. But I will be like, what did you learn? What did you take from it? Did you work with a team? And so on. So typically though, if they drill you on it, it's not super deep because they know like, okay, most internships, 3 months, it's not gonna be a lot.
So I have a second question. Did they ask you your GPA at 2 Sigma?
No one has ever asked me for my GPA, whether even the prior, like even when I had just graduated and just applying at other places, I don't think anyone has ever asked me my GPA. Certainly for all the hedge funds, no one cared about my GPA. No one asked. They were only interested in my MongoDB experience.
So you said you did that MongoDB first, right? And then you started working there full time. So did you already know? Because I'm interested in understanding like what area I want to go into. So like, and you mentioned that you aren't really interested in web development, which I think at this point I'm kind of like, I agree with myself at least. So did you know you wanted to do systems level like programming, I guess, like, and that is that the reason that you chose MongoDB for that?
It's weird. I like to think of it like when a bunch of your friends are like, where do you want to go out for dinner? I didn't know what I wanted. I only knew what I didn't want. Like, I don't want pizza. And like, I don't want web development. But at the time, I honestly had no idea. One of the reasons why I took the internship at MongoDB was like, wow, this is one of the only places that has accepted me. I guess I have no choice. I knew that it was hard because like I never took a database class at Rutgers. I wasn't even that interested in databases. I was like, it's whatever. I knew I liked systems. I knew I liked algorithms. I knew I wasn't super into web dev. I wasn't super into mobile dev. I was like, okay, I'll take it. I'll say this to them when they place me for projects and stuff. I guess I was lucky in that I realized I really liked it. It checked off a lot of the boxes that I wanted without me even knowing it. Like I had no idea how databases work when they hired me. I was like, I don't even know what a database is. So I guess I was lucky in that regard. I think it's definitely worth like speaking to the places you interview at and be like, okay, even if you don't know what you want, it's definitely helpful to like, I don't want to do this if possible. Like, do you have a role for me here? I know that's not super helpful because for me, it just ended up that way, but I hope it was helpful in some way.
Yeah, no, it's like your experience.
So before you mentioned that while you were practicing for Sigma, you had a lot of stress with like dealing with talking to your boss and stuff, but like to more practical types of way to deal with the stress of, I guess, searching for a job after, you come home from work at like 5 o'clock, whatever. How did you deal with that, and like what types of systems did you use to balance your time?
So if you didn't hear, the question is like, what were some of the practical ways I dealt with the stress of looking for a new job and like interviewing? I think I sort of parceled it out into 3 parts. The first part was definitely the friend thing. I made sure to like, speak to someone, especially like my close computer science friends. Like, I found that like some of my other friends who didn't understand computer science couldn't really give me the support I wanted because they didn't understand. They didn't get like this is what the industry is like. So I did have a group of friends from Rutgers who did computer science with me, and they definitely helped me. Like they like understood, right? They were able to say like, yeah, I think you are justified in like wanting to leave and like find a new job. So that's part one. Part two was I wanted to feel like I was doing something practical to get myself a new job. And so I allocated, okay, I want to spend at least, I think I said 4 hours each week studying. And so I literally would block off time on my Google Calendar, like Kyle will study for like interviewing for like this amount of time. Like I would schedule it in and be like, okay, I know I'm like studying and I'm like putting time on and I'm taking it seriously and I'm not just gonna procrastinate. Seeing that on my calendar made me feel better about myself. Like, oh wow, look, I have a plan. I'm gonna stick to this plan, and I'm gonna do it. And I know that I'm preparing myself, and not like, oh God, I jumped into the interview, like without anything. And then the third thing, which I don't think a lot of people would admit, but this is like one thing about like using your benefits. I actually found a therapist. I think it's like kind of funny to say because like a lot of people like associate therapy and like, okay, you have a therapist, they're crazy. Like you go in a mental hospital. I was like, okay, I'm really stressed. I need someone to talk to. Maybe I should get some professional help. So my like insurance at MongoDB covered, like mental health stuff. I had to pay only like a certain number of dollars for each visit. So I actually went to a therapist and would be like, hey, I'm really stressed right now. I paid someone to listen to me and help me with my problems. So those are the three things I did. I think number three is definitely like weird to a lot of people, especially undergrads, but it's like, you guys should know, like, I know you guys are super stressed all the time. I think you should feel free to be like, mental health is important, I need help, and not feel like you're crazy. I think that's really important.
I was wondering, at Two Sigma and other hedge funds, what sort of trends are you seeing in terms of novel trading strategies or consideration of different types of data sets such as alternative data?
So the question is about like the trends for trading strategies. It's interesting, like if you're a member of a hedge fund, a lot of hedge funds will like, there's like actually a surprising amount of data that's published on this sort of stuff. In terms of like alternate data sources, for sure, once Donald Trump, like this is I'm not even kidding, this is for real. Once Donald Trump was elected, it would be like he would tweet something and then the price of X would change. So basically, everyone on the street has natural language processors that read in Twitter data, that read in headlines, and will literally like, okay, based on who said it, this is not a secret. Basically, every hedge fund does, especially Twitter. You have to bet every hedge fund is listening to Donald Trump's Twitter account. The minute he mentions any company, that company could go up or down. I am not in the modeling space though, so I'm not super familiar with any of like the cutting edge stuff. I'm only familiar with like the basic strategies that like a lot of hedge funds use. So I can't really talk much in that regard. All of the secrets at Two Sigma are hidden for me. I cannot read any of the trading strategies. So I couldn't answer even if I wanted to. Thank you.
What's like the day in the life of a software engineer at Two Sigma? Like when do you like come into work? How do you like break up tickets?
It depends on the team. Two Sigma is enormous, so about 1,600 people at Two Sigma. Each team has vastly different requirements. And so I'll tell you a little bit about my day, but this is very much not representative of most people. We have a dedicated operations team that deals with the morning open. So like because the opening of the stock exchanges is such an important event, there's an entire sub-team that's dedicated to making sure that it works. So I don't have to wake up super early and get in. It's their job. So I usually roll in around 9:30. I'm one of the first people on my team who's in at work, actually. When it comes to like assigning tickets, again, I work for the high frequency market data platform. So it's the thing that ingests data from all the exchanges super fast. So unlike MongoDB, where I was working on this public product that had a release once a year, the high frequency platform releases every week. So it's a lot more short-term focused. We don't do like agile like management on our team. I actually do it, but only for myself. So I'm also my own project manager. It's kind of weird, right? It's like I will wake up and be like, these are the things I know I want to address. And I also just have to be ready for like all of a sudden like, oh God, something broke. The trading has stopped. At that point, everybody drops what they're doing and like, everyone tries to help out. So it's sort of like a touch and go sort of thing. Like you have to be able to like focus on what you want to work on, but also be flexible enough to be like, hey, there's an emergency. I'm going to drop everything and help out in whatever way I can. But this is just for me. If you're like a researcher, this could be completely different, right? They're not focusing on the live trading. They're focusing more on how do I make a new trading strategy that will make us millions of dollars. So like that sort of workflow, I'm not familiar with, but it's very different.
Like, what is like the ability? Is there a lot of ability within Two Sigma to like move around between teams, or are you kind of stuck in your team for a while and then you have to kind of like, if you know what I'm saying, like if you didn't like your team, is there like a way to move often?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is the same. I think most good software engineering companies have this. MongoDB has the exact same policy. Two Sigma has this policy. You basically stay with your team for a set amount of time, usually at least a year. After that, you're more than welcome to tell your manager, I need to leave. I want to leave. Most software engineering companies will be like, if it means you're going to quit, if you don't like what you're doing, yes, I'll be more than happy to keep you in the same company than for you to just quit and go somewhere else. So one of the people who interviewed me at Two Sigma worked on my team. And when I joined, she was like, also, I'm in the process of switching to a completely different team. And then like within 3 weeks, she was just like in like the other building. She's like, okay, bye, Chen. I'll see you in Slack. Like, so it's totally like feasible. And I think most companies have this. This is another thing that you should ask, right? You should ask when you're interviewing places, how flexible is it, for me to switch teams? MongoDB is pretty flexible. Two Sigma is pretty flexible. I hear Google seems to be pretty flexible, but you should always ask. For some companies, it is true that they might not be. I'll go in this order. Sorry.
And then
Okay. So you mentioned like optimize, like that they would give you some interview questions about optimization. So I guess like I was wondering, how do you like prepare for that? Or I guess like, is that something, if you were to answer that you drew mostly from your work experience, because like that was part of what you did at Mongo?
So the question is about like, how do you answer a question about optimization? I think it's like it's a three-part, have 3 parts to it. I remember some of the basics about optimization that I learned in school. So there are certain things that, like if you've taken the systems programming course or the computer architecture course, they tell you about the caches. Like you have main memory, you have the L2 cache, you have the L1 cache. I have to deal with that every day. Like knowledge about that is absolutely fundamental. If I didn't know that, I probably don't think I'd have been hired. So like there's the basic like academic knowledge. The second thing is sort of like domain specific. So I work in C and C++. If you're a C or C++ developer, you know that the memory model is super important. C and C++, I think, are unique in the regard that you must think about how you manage performance in memory very, very carefully. Unlike a language like Python, which hides it from you, in C and C++, it's like at the forefront, and you have to think about it a lot. So to be fair, it's like, in my everyday programming, I just have to be aware of it because the language forced me to be aware of it. Certainly, if I was a Python programmer, this would be a much more difficult question to answer. And then the third thing is, yes, a lot of it has come from like experience. I have run into just like situations at MongoDB where someone wrote this piece of code with like a data structure. They were adding to this like set. The way they added to it was the worst case time because it was in sorted order and it ended up being like order n squared instead of order n log n or something like that. Sometimes it's just the stuff that you pick up while you're on the job. This sort of stuff like optimization it's not really covered a lot in school. It very much is either you seek it out yourself or you learn it on the job. But it tends to be dependent on the type of work that you want to do. If you're interested in being a systems engineer, this is definitely something that like you should look into. I think the biggest thing in terms of optimization for systems programming, if you're interested, is memory management and optimization. That tends to be things that kill your performance.
Just like a follow-up, like just like for your own learning, like since you said like something that's not covered in school very much, like have you just like watched videos before, or like how have you kind of like increased your knowledge about it?
I was very lucky because at MongoDB there was a very strong culture of, hey, we're going to have like a reading group about blank, and there was actually a group of people who are really into optimization, and I learned a lot through them because they would be like, this month we're going to have like a lecture on like optimizing blah 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 blah. So I was extremely lucky in that regard that I had the chance to learn from people, like just be like, hi, I have all these questions. Please tell me everything you know. Certainly, I think I did look up some stuff on the internet, but learning from my coworkers was definitely the most like valuable experience. And that's definitely, again, not something you can get everywhere. So I was very lucky to have that.
So like going into a new job or something, they usually give you a little bit of wiggle room, a little time to get adjusted. Did you find that the amount of time that MongoDB gave you was more than 2 Sigma? Because coming out of college and 2 Sigma, this is not your second job, you should be able to adjust.
Yeah, I actually felt that very acutely like 2 months ago. I think, like, so I just hit the 6-month mark, and only now do I feel acclimated at 2 Sigma. I feel like recently, like I was told like, oh, like you sort of like need to pick up the pace on some things, and that sort of took me by surprise. MongoDB certainly was very generous with me in the amount of time I had to sort of like ramp up and learn and get ready. But I think that the industry is also something that's important here. Like in finance, things tend to be like, my time is money, and so you do things quickly. 2 Sigma, I think, is, as far as hedge funds go, they're very generous and they're very like sort of nice. There's a few other hedge funds that I'm not going to name, but like they just have they have a reputation on the street for being sort of brutal, right? Like there are certain hedge funds who have a reputation of, if you become a modeler there and none of your models make money within the first N years, this is like bye. Like you're straight up fired. Like so it tends to be a little bit more brutal. So is that all the time we have, or?
Yeah, 10 minutes after.
Okay, so thank you very much. I will stick around like somewhere here, like, if you have questions. But again, thank you very much for coming.
Also, if this is your first time here at FizzBuzz, join the Facebook group, and also our application for keyboard closes the 19th,
Yes.
and that's in the Facebook group.
Yeah, so basically the way that e-board application works is that you'll be asked a few general questions about, yeah, I guess I could go on there too. You'll be asked a few general questions about the pertaining to the e-board position that you want, and then you might get called in for an interview after that, and then you'll get the final decision. But you don't need to know any code, I promise.
Apply, even if this is your first time.
Yeah.
We're looking for new people. People are dedicated.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
excited
he's
to
gonna
grow.
be the vice president, just so you know who you're working with.
That's
Yeah,
cool,
so
Bear. I'm
I've
joining.
never been here before. Apply, like we're young bloods, we're looking for young blood. If any of you are freshmen or sophomores, we'd love to have our members are now getting older because freshmen and sophomores generally don't care about the careers. So if you're young, apply, we want you, and please come to more meetings. I hope you enjoyed it.
Woo.
And-